Tonight I'm going to do a reading from the 7th Arcanum of the Mebes Tarot Majors, which is the Chariot, pathway from Bina to Kavira, victory, and this one stands out a bit better than the one in the book. Take note of the sphinxes. As Levi points out, Hermes, seated in the chariot, touches the Black Sphinx with the point of a sword of steel, but the White Sphinx with a sceptre of gold. Paul Christian says it's the Chariot of Osiris, associated with the Hebrew letter Zain, which expresses in the divine world the Septenary, the domination of spirit over nature. And Ouspensky, who was studying the tarot at the same time as the Mebes School in 1912, when this book was first published, said, "He, the charioteer, controls the sphinxes by the power of a magic word, but the tension of his will may fail, and then the magic word will lose its power, and he may be devoured by the sphinxes." This is a very complex arcanum. When Tom Berg wrote Meditations of the Tarot, he said that he could have written a whole book just about the 7th Arcanum. So it's going to be pretty difficult, I think, to convey this. So bear with me, I'll try to work through it, see if you can follow. And there's a lot of diagrams, which I hope will come out well on the screen. Anyway, right, here we go. Before proceeding to the analysis of the 7th Arcanum, we will be aware of the constructive scheme of the first 6 arcana, which determines the existence of the 7th as the final link in the chain of 6. All authors who dealt with this issue propose the following construction. I either wish to recognise the role of the elements of the main series of the dynamic processes for the Arcanum. We will draw this point of view for one row of headlines of the Arcanum, leaving the listener to repeat the exercise for the other 2 rows. So this is this diagram that is done to illustrate the next main points. We have a positive row over which we have the letter Yod, and a negative row of numbers over which is the letter He, and the tetragrammaton is on the left hand side. As an example, let's apply this system excuse me, to a series of arcanum titles in the field of man and their manifestations, letting students repeat the same exercise with the sets of the other 2 fields. Sorry. Husband, 1. Fertilizes his wife, 2. Thereby determining the birth, 3. Of a child who, physically and astrally nourished, 4. Acquires authority, also 4. Sufficient to manifest himself on behalf of the whole family in the astral plane, that is, in the field of quintessential manipulations, 5. But here it meets the dilemma of good and evil, 6. Chooses good and celebrates victory, 7. I draw your attention to the fact that, firstly, in some way, each subsequent element of a series of arcana is passive with respect to the previous one and active with respect to the next, which is the same as with the Tree of Life. And secondly, each element of the second column is passive with respect to the element of the first column placed in the same line. I won't read all that out, it's too complicated. This all makes possible the construction of another scheme, equivalent to the first and proposed by Papus, where the vertices of the dotted triangle constitute a reflection of the vertices of the triangle of four lines, or its negative poles, its wives, so to speak. This scheme of two triangles will become clearer as we study other manifestations of Arcanum 7, whose number we will place in the middle of the figure, so the dotted triangle is pointing up. To Arcanum 7 corresponds the Hebrew letter Zain and the zodiacal sign of Gemini. The hieroglyph is an arrow, thrown with a certain aim, and that following a straight line will hit the target. The titles of the Arcanum are provided by 3 arithmetical deconstructions of evolutionary order. The deconstruction 7 equals 3 plus 4, that is, the predominance of the spirit, 3, divine and natura, as in Arcanum 3, on the form, 4, as in Arcanum 4, determines the title Spiritus Dominat Formum in the field of manifestations of the archetype. The same deconstruction, but in the reverse order, 7 equals 4 plus 3, will give us the opposite of the above currency and will correspond to obscurantism and the artifices of black magic. In the human plane, we will be guided by the deconstruction 7 equals 1 plus 6, that is, will plus probation, by the bifurcation of the roads, lead us to victory. The title of the Arcanum in this plane will therefore be Victory. Formula 7 equals 6 plus 1 expresses, by contrast, the failure of the ordeal is tantamount to defeat. In the plane of nature, the title is given by a very interesting deconstruction, 7 equals 5 plus 2, which expresses the predominance of pentagrammatic principles, traditions, customs, religion, on nature, naturata, Arcanum 2, that is, on the creation of nature. This predominance translates into law of property, the right of ownership. The arithmetical divisive possibilities of the Arcanum do not exhaust themselves with those who gave us their titles in the field of the Theosophical Ternary. We can also deconstruct it into 7 equals 3 plus 1 plus 3, where the element of the will oscillates between the two triangles, that of the archetype and that of nature. Another deconstruction, 7 equals 2 plus 3 plus 2, in which the central ternary, world of emanations, rules the two binaries, lingans, that of man and that of nature, which by fertilization are resembling each other. The analysis of these secondary deconstructions is less frequent than that of the others mentioned. The scholarly title of the card is the Hermes, and the common one is the Chariot. On the card, we see on top a blue canopy, all interspersed with massive gold staves, symbolizing the higher subplanes of the astral with its inhabitants, the pentagrams, whose power is superior to that of man and sometimes protects him. The canopy is supported by 4 columns, symbolizing the emetic virtues, daring, silence, knowledge and love, or to know, to will, to dare, to be silent. Among these columns are the activities of the wizard, the victor, which is under the bold chin. On his head, a golden crown with 3 pentagrams signifies penetration, consciousness, and volitional in the mysteries of the 3 planes of the universe. His robe is a breastplate of the knowledge and victory, protecting it against the dangers that for the profane can be destroyers. On the left shoulder of the victor, we see a white crescent moon, which symbolizes the power, the soul, that is, the power of evolutionary and subtle achievements. I'm not sure they've got every single bit on the image, but it's supposed to have a moon on his shoulder. On the right shoulder, a growing darkness or the power coagulates, the possibility of dense forms and realizing them in the lower subplanes. The right angles in the armour indicate the methods by which the victor knows how to protect himself against aggression. They are the accuracy of logical thinking, the proper form and the circumspection and infallibility in the achievements of the physical plane. The victor's left hand wields a cane, surmounted by a sphere on which is a square, which in turn supports an equilateral triangle. That is, the spirit dominates the form, which in turn rests on the terrestrial sphere, the physical plane. In his right hand we see the victory, that is, a weapon in the physical plane, a convincing word in the intermediate subplanes, a figurative presentation of that word in the astral plane, a penetration of thought on the mental plane. And where was the victor to celebrate his victory? Sorry, that's emails and things. He was in a cubic-shaped chariot, his own accomplishment. We also see the cube in the Arcanum of the Emperor. All my cards are mixed up. There's the cube that he's resting on, and that's now chariot. And what was the method used to build that carriage? We found the answer in the two symbols at the front. The ornament, a sphere, a yod, from which split two serpentine-shaped extensions, the two hay, and which is supported by two open wings, the vow. This is, of course, a dynamic cycle of the tetragrammaton. Further down, we see another symbol, the lingam, alluding to the second way to read the great name, Yod-Hava or Yod-Hava, which is the male principle plus the female principle. The carriage is drawn by two sphinxes, the symbolic pair of astral forces, which correspond to the medium term of the great Arcanum. The sphinx on the left is black, the one on the right is white. Sphinxes look at each other but pull in opposite directions, the two polarities of the astral swirl. They run over the surface of a large globe, the quaternary of the elementary root of the great Arcanum. The wheels of the chariot are trimmed with gold hoops, and the nail head replaced by eyes. The wheels symbolize the astral vortices that carry the whirlwind. The eyes mean that the cells of these astral formations have their own individuality and concepts. And he quotes here from the prophet Ezekiel. These wheels were so high that they were afraid, and the four had their chests full of eyes all around. As we can see, the image of the card is very synthetic, as is the synthetic character of that Arcanum ending the first septenary of the Tarot Majors. From the picture of the Arcanum, let us move on to the Pentacle of Arcanum 7. Occultists of antiquity in the Middle Ages correlated it with a seven-pointed star, and modern occultists frequently use the pentacle below the star, triangle on top of the square. Neither of these two is considered a fulfilling force, they are just symbols. Both can be reversed, symbolizing black magic and corresponding to the deconstruction 7 equals 4 plus 3. That is, seeking to subjugate the ternary of spiritual manifestations, creating the confusion and complication of forms, difficulty understanding the essence of the universe, and thereby dominating the victim of the widespread obscurantism. In initiation ceremonies, when testing a neophyte for fear of astral manifestations, astral cliches, true or simulated, the path of the neophyte is along carpets representing the seven-pointed star, for white magicians in the upright position, for black in the opposite inverted direction. Let us talk about the septenary pentacle, which will be useful to us in the future. Let us set out to study the most important septenaries, placing them in similar tables. I want to start with the great septenary of the secondary reasons. In Arcanum 3, we discuss the various ternaries that belong to the ascending triangle type and which can be encompassed in a general concept of ternary of primary causes. An adept of the Unitarianism, imbued with occult theories and who proposes to study from a purely scientific point of view manifestations of the primordial principle that outline the world of emanation, the existence of the three primary causes. I'm just seeing if I can actually convey this properly. So of the three primary causes, he says, the first is the neutral element, the second positive is to be, the third negative is to know. Thus, the concept of the world of emanation in its higher plane will be expressed as an idea of manifestation, bipolarized in the idea of what is capable of acquiring knowledge and of what may be known. The last idea, negative, of course, will limit the field of manifestation of the preceding positive. If we are to achieve a spatial and symbolic representation of the world of emanation, we must clothe the idea of the manifestation with the totality of the manifested, embracing both ourselves as the universe with its countless solar systems. This totality will divide symbolically on the one hand in our eagerness for astronomical knowledge, and on the other hand in all that is yet to be known. The three primordial causes manifest in the soul plane by a series of reflexes that the old school sought to order in a sevenfold system of so-called secondary causes. Symbolically, these causes can easily be identified with what the ancients called planetary manifestations of our solar system. The observations of many centuries and perhaps many millennia have added to the essence of this symbolism, establishing correlations between angular positions of the planets in the celestial vault and the quality of their influence on the field of terrestrial life. We will now explain what we mean by planet and planetary life. The study of the seven coagulates we call the body of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury and Moon is part of the astronomy and astrophysics sciences. Many fields of knowledge study the eighth object, the body of the Earth. We will associate with the idea of each of these coagulates, which we attribute to the physical plane, another two pairs of representations, one of which will lie in the astral plane and the other in the mental one. For example, on the Earth we, in addition to the body in the physical plane, will seek the genius and the astrosome in the astral plane, the spirit and the angel in the mental plane. The spirit of the Earth is the synthesis of the spiritual impulses of terrestrial humanity in relation to the Earth. In the present moment, the spirit of the Earth corresponds to the synthesis of our aspirations for the development and improvement of the Earth. The angel of the Earth is the ideological part of the opposition that earthly karma exerts on these aspirations. The spirit is evolutionary The angel is involutive. When the binary spirit, angel of the earth will be neutralized by the agreement of its elements, the task of evolution of the earth will be solved in principle. The genius of the earth is a synthesis of the forms in which the spirit carries out its evolving ideas. These are the forms and formal methods that mankind pursues in the system of cultivating the planet by it, adapting it to its goals. Earth's astrosome, that is, the synthetic astral tourbillon that is struggling in its plan with genius, trying to defend the goal of the angel. The neutralization of the genius Earth astrosome binary provides a formal solution to the Earth's evolution problem without creating a real solution to the problem, which should be attributed to the neutralization of the earthly humanities body, Earth's binary. If the neutralization of the highest binary is called the kingdom of God on earth in principle, then the second binary is neutralized by the kingdom of God in forms and the third in realities. On each of the 7 so-called planets, something similar happens. Each of the 7 planets has a spirit with an angel, a genius with an astrosome, and a kind of humanity in the animal, vegetable, or mineral world, depending on the degree of development of the planet. For us, the general, even if understandable, planetary life could not be expressed through normal terrestrial schemes, for only those elements of general planetary life which are reflected in the forms of terrestrial life are accessible to us. Astrology, Kabbalah, magic, etc. cover only the influence of the spirit, the genius, and so on, from this planet or another planet, as manifested on Earth, but they do not penetrate, neither in essence nor nature. The same happens in our daily lives. We form an opinion about the people we know as they manifest in relation to us. Little do we know about their intimate lives. It is these incomplete characteristics that we correlate by analogy with secondary causes, giving the latter the planetary names. We must remember that the main mythological egregores nowadays called divinities of the antiquity were in close astral connection with planetary entities and in accordance with their manifestation at certain times. This strengthens the deities. However, the planetary entities evolved and the deities were more stationary. The link that existed between both gradually weakened. When the great ascetic and occultist, known in history as Julian the Apostate, made an evocation of the mythological egregores, they were so that they presented themselves before the great magician as pale, thin, and sickly gods of the antique. After this preparation, let us turn to planetary influences and their correspondences. Big tables coming. We will distribute the 7 secondary causes, which is explained above are a reflection of the 3 primary causes, in a 3-column scheme. To the planets of the right column, positive, we will give the qualifier good. To the planets of the negative, the term bad. We will say that the Sun is synthetic, that Mercury fits, that the Moon is passive. The Sun in relation to the Moon will be a masculine element, fecundating it with the help of Mercury. That's the table of the Moon. Mars and Venus approach through the synthetic Sun, because in this there are elements of the 2 planets. In the same way, Saturn and Jupiter approach from Mars. Apollo, the Sun, Saturn and Jupiter, we will say, are masculine planets, Venus and the Moon female. This is according to a purely mythological presentation. Mercury is attributed to the androgyne, which agrees with its role as a mediator in fertilization. We will now distribute the 7 secondary causes with their main analogies within the general framework. So, So it's the planets with their angels and colours and fragrances, stones, metals. Just seeing what yeah, it's all about the properties of planets on the table. Now he's going to talk about, okay, let's point out the difference between a pentacle and a talisman. It's a bit more practical magic here. Both one and the other, if dimensions allow it, can be worn next to the body. A talisman is a condenser of planetary energy that already exists in the person. If, for example, a person lacks the energy of Jupiter, it is not appropriate for it to use a talisman consecrated to this planet. The pentacle, unlike the talisman, by the power of its consecration, attracts the fluids of the determined planet and thus, in an artificial way, creates a connection with the egregore elements of this planet. With our example, because there is no natural bond with Jupiter, the person can use a pentacle of this planet so as to receive its influence if this is wanted. And then he's going to explain how to prepare a pentagram and to consecrate it. In the final column of the tables, he's talking about sacramental correspondences, like extreme unction, baptism, the Eucharist. And the days. Okay. It remains for us to speak a few words about the so-called friendships and enmities of the planets, and also explain the method of calculating planetary hours for the days of the week. Actually, I'm not, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I'll end with the notes that were written on the seventh Arcanum. We see clearly why the author of Meditations on the Tarot said an entire volume could be devoted to the seventh Arcanum, and the subject still wouldn't be satisfactorily concluded. So with this in mind, we shall keep our notes brief. One of the key lessons we can take away from the seventh letter is that whilst the charioteer, on the one hand, represents victory over the three temptations, and is faithful to the vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity, he also faces the greater danger of the fourth temptation. A synthesis of the preceding three temptations, this is the spiritual temptation of the victorious through his victory itself. It is the temptation to act in one's own name, to act as a master instead of servant. Mastery over this temptation is a necessary attainment within the seventh Arcanum if we are to avoid falling into the spiritual temptation represented by the Superman or the Nietzschean Übermensch. In the life of Valentin Tomberg, we might see a certain conscious devotion to the planetary influences which oversee the life of man, or a natural inclination towards the same. In the latter years of his life, Tomberg wrote masterworks of jurisprudence, corresponding to the Saturnian old age spoken of by Mebes, and the whole of his life might be said to correspond to a classic initiatory path. This being the seventh Arcanum, we are also put in mind of the Kybalion, where it is written, "The principles of truth are seven. He who knows these understandingly possesses the magic key, before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open." The seven hermetic principles cited are mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and the principle of gender.